Dendrochronology, tree ring dating, can tell you the year a timber was felled. Applied to historic buildings, it sometimes reveals that the primary structural timber across an entire building predates the official construction date by decades. The standard explanation is timber reuse. But timber reuse doesn't work when the entire structural inventory of the building is old. Not a rafter here or there, but the wall plates, the principal rafters, the floor joists, the ridge beams. That is not reuse. That is an earlier building, and the inheritance period's new administrative authorities had a very specific mechanism for making earlier buildings disappear from the record. There is a technique in architectural history called dendrochronology, tree ring dating. Applied to the timber elements of historic buildings, it provides dates of extraordinary precision. The year the tree was felled, which in most pre-modern construction means the year the timber was prepared for use. A building's official date of construction can be checked against the dendrochronological date of its timber elements. In many cases, these dates agree. In some cases, they don't. The timber is older than the official construction date, sometimes much older, and the standard response to this discrepancy, in the official literature of architectural history, is to invoke a practice of timber reuse. Old timbers from earlier buildings were incorporated into the new construction, which is why the wood is older than the building. Timber reuse is a real practice. It is documented throughout architectural history. Pre-modern builders were not wasteful of good timber, and did incorporate older timber elements into new buildings when available. But timber reuse as an explanation has limits. It works for a rafter here, a beam there, the kind of minor structural incorporation that leaves the overall timber inventory of the building still broadly consistent with the official construction date. It does not work when the dendrochronological dating of the building's primary structural timber is consistently several decades older than the official construction date across the entire structural system. When the wall plates and the principal rafters and the floor joists and the ridge beams all date to a period significantly before the official construction, the reuse explanation is straining against the evidence. You are not reusing old timbers if the entire structural timber inventory of the building is old. You are reading the evidence of an earlier building. Dendrochronology is one forensic technique. There are others. Thermoluminescence, dating of fired clay materials, bricks and tiles and ceramics, provides dates for the firing of those materials that can be compared to official construction dates. Mortar analysis, examining the chemical composition and microstructure of historic mortars, can indicate the period of their mixing with a precision that the standard architectural history of mortar recipes supports. Paint analysis, examining the specific pigment compositions and binding media of historic paint layers, can date paint applications to specific technological periods. All of these techniques are applied routinely by architectural historians and conservators to historic buildings, and all of them, applied to specific buildings whose official construction dates have been central to the inheritance period narrative, occasionally produce results that are inconsistent with those official dates. I want to focus on a specific category of inconsistency that appears in a specific category of building: the large civic buildings of the inheritance period, the custom houses, the courthouses, the government buildings, the exchange buildings that were officially constructed across North America and Europe in the period roughly 1820 to 1870. These buildings are the most direct physical evidence of the inheritance period. The structures that the new administrative order moved into and claimed as its own, assigning construction dates, naming architects, producing the documentary record of a building history that the physical evidence sometimes contradicts. The Merchants' Exchange in Philadelphia, officially completed in 1832 to designs by William Strickland, is one of the most frequently cited examples of early American civic architecture. Its design is considered a masterpiece of the Greek Revival, and Strickland's authorship is documented in contemporary records. But the foundation stone of the Merchants' Exchange, examined during a renovation project in the 1960s, showed mortar characteristics inconsistent with mortar technology of the 1830s. The specific lime and aggregate composition, the microstructural characteristics of carbonation and pore structure, suggested a significantly earlier mixing date. The renovation team's report noted the discrepancy and suggested possible earlier foundation work on the site. The report did not suggest that the building predated Strickland. The report did not ask what the earlier foundation work might have been. The discrepancy was noted and moved past. Why is this significant? Because the Merchants' Exchange is not an isolated case. The mortar discrepancy pattern, where foundation or lower-course mortars show characteristics inconsistent with the official construction period, appears in multiple inheritance period civic buildings across multiple cities. It appears in buildings with different official architects, different official funding sources, different official construction histories. The discrepancy is consistent across cases that should, if the official dates are correct, show consistent mortar characteristics. Instead, the pattern shows a consistent gap between the official dates and what the mortar chemistry suggests. A gap that always runs in the same direction. The mortar is older than the official date. Never younger. Always older. The architectural practice of assigning false construction dates is not in itself a novel hypothesis. Architectural historians are well aware that official construction dates are not always accurate. Buildings are dated to the year of their formal dedication or official opening, which may postdate the actual completion of construction by years. Buildings are dated to periods of significant renovation rather than original construction. Buildings are dated to the period of a specific features addition rather than the building's overall erection. These practices produce official dates that are wrong in specific and documentable ways, but wrong in ways that the documentary record itself can usually correct. The documentary record shows the discrepancy between the dedication date and the construction completion date. The renovation records distinguish the renovation period from the original construction period. The category of dating error I'm describing is different. It is not a discrepancy between different phases of the documented construction history. It is a discrepancy between the entire documented construction history and what the physical evidence of the building indicates. The documentation says the building was built in 1832. The mortar says it was built significantly earlier. There is no documentary record of an earlier construction, because the earlier construction is exactly what the official date was assigned to conceal. The documentation doesn't record an earlier date and then assign a later official date. It simply assigns the official date and stops. The earlier construction is absent from the documentation entirely. It exists only in the physical evidence that the documentation was produced to supersede. How was this done? How does an administrative system assign a false construction date to a building and make the false date stick in the historical record? The mechanism is simpler than it sounds. The inheritance periods, new administrative authorities occupied pre-existing buildings. They commissioned architects to survey, assess, and in many cases, modify or partially reconstruct those buildings to suit their specific requirements. The architects produced reports and drawings and correspondence that documented their work. That documentation, filed with the new administrative authorities, became the official record of the building's history. Not because anyone explicitly falsified the date, because the documentation began at the point of the new authority's engagement with the building. The prior existence of the building, prior to the new authority's occupation and commissioning, was simply not part of what the documentation recorded. The documentation was not designed to record it. It was designed to record what the new authority did to the building, and the new authority's engagement with the building, the survey, the modification, the adaptation to new uses, was the event that the documentation called the construction. Strickland's drawings of the Merchants' Exchange are genuine. His correspondence about the project is genuine. The documented payments are genuine. The exchange was genuinely modified and adapted under Strickland's direction in the period the documentation records. But the foundation that Strickland's neoclassical superstructure sits on, the foundation with the anomalous mortar, may not be Strickland's work. It may be what was already there, incorporated into Strickland's design without being identified as prior work, absorbed into the official construction history as if it had been created in 1832 rather than whenever the mortar chemistry actually indicates. The specific dating fraud I'm describing is systemic because the mechanism that produces it is systemic. Every time the inheritance period's administrative authorities occupied a pre-existing building and commissioned adaptation work, the adaptation documentation became the official construction history. The pre-existing building disappeared from the record, absorbed into the new authority's account of what it had built, multiplied across the dozens, the hundreds, the thousands of buildings that the inheritance period occupied and claimed across 2 continents. The mechanism produced a systematic false dating of a significant portion of the built environment, a systematic attribution of pre-reset construction to post-reset architects, a systematic erasure of the prior civilization from the physical record it had left behind. The physical evidence is still there, in the mortar, in the dendrochronology, in the thermoluminescence readings, in the specific paint layer sequences that predate the official construction period, in the foundation stones whose characteristics contradict the official dates. The evidence is in the buildings, available to be read by anyone with the appropriate forensic techniques and the appropriate willingness to ask what it means when the physical evidence and the documentary record disagree. The buildings are not silent. They are speaking. In the language of material properties and chemical characteristics and microstructural evidence about when they were actually built. The question is whether we are willing to listen to what they are saying and to follow the answer to its necessary conclusion. If the mechanism for dating fraud was not fabrication but omission, if the documentation of what an architect did to an inherited building simply became the official record of its construction, with no mention of what was already there, how many buildings in how many cities are standing on foundations that belong to a civilization the official dates are designed to erase? Leave your thoughts in the comments and share this with anyone who studies architectural history and takes official construction dates at face value.